You were in Essex, Ian. Is that right?
Still am.
Uh-huh.
And Robert worked alongside me. We had a happy time together, working in a team of advisors.
Uh-huh.
And we had many links in common. I was just talking to him before. Torbryan is a place I visited in Devon because it's the ancestral home of the Peter family of Essex.
All right. Yeah.
Sir William Peter was principal secretary to nearly all the Tudor monarchs. And
Yeah.
Robert and I got involved with some dramatic history there. We dressed up and pretended to be of the Tudor period.
And I nearly got beheaded as well.
Well, you were late to a meeting.
Yeah, it was. We had a school come over all the way from Norfolk, didn't we?
Well, it was Alan Childs and his
Yes,
Norfolk school who conceived the idea. It takes a teacher outside Essex to tell Essex teachers what they should be doing.
Absolutely.
And we followed his lead.
He was a novelist, wasn't he?
The Ingliston Hall scheme still runs, Robert,
Yeah.
when there are schools allowed to visit.
Yes. Oh, good. Yes. I remember Lord Peter took the part of his predecessor.
Sir William, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, that's right.
The only bit he didn't like was the horse bit. Being a drama man, he hated horses, and we insisted on him coming in with his horse.
Oh,
and
right.
he wouldn't ride it, he walked it in.
Yes. Okay.
Because he reckoned it was a cantankerous beast. So when they put the saddle on it, it breathed in or whatever, and the girth was never right. So it flopped round and he fell off.
Oh, crap. So dear.
But that was his story. He's from drama.
Are you talking about Sir William Peter or Lord Peter? Which one?
That was Lord Peter.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yes.
Not Sir William. He could ride.
Yes.
He rode back and forth to London or Greenwich or wherever the king was repeatedly.
You had to do it in those days, didn't you?
That's right.
Yes. I seem to remember Lord Peter's daughter took part in it. She took the part of Catherine Grey. I remember. It was all
Trust you to remember the females, Robert. Anyway, are we near time?
I think yes. I think we've only got 7 at the moment, but it's going to be high quality stuff. So
well, I don't know. 7 is good enough for me, Robert.
Okay, I can introduce you as a former colleague. You have also played some very significant roles in the HA. You've been branches secretary, haven't you, or chair even? Not the chair of the branches organization, keeping an eye on all the branches.
I wasn't chair, but I was involved. Okay,
right. And you were an advisor in Essex, weren't you? With a focus on this area, really.
Advisory teacher for local history and records.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Well, without any more ado, I'll hand over to you, Ian, and thank you very much for agreeing to do this in Local and Community History Month. So over to you.
You're very welcome, Robert. As you can see on your screens, I've reminded you that it is local and community. Clever of Robert to arrange this. And Paula Kitching's advice, one of the most valuable pieces of advice when she moved to London, was to look at.
Sorry. Last. No. Sorry. I need to unmute you. Can you unmute yourself, Ian? Sorry. No. Something's gone wrong here. Plus. Crumbs. Heck.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, I can now. Yes, sorry about that.
Right. Thank you for inviting me to talk about local history. in this local history month. And the piece of advice that you can't see on your screen is to look up when you're in town looking at buildings. But this is my title, of course, and I am an old heretic. I believe in using originals. I think it behoves us to get the very best sources for children, and the very best are, of course, local to them. Local is a term I won't bother arguing about, but I will remind you of the Roman view of the spirit of place. I think everywhere has a spirit of place, and it's vital we acknowledge it. Now, as a teacher from the north in Essex trying to teach, I was constantly interrupted by youngsters who would say, when we were doing the Romans, "Please, sir, is the lane behind the avenues a Roman road, as my mum says?" And I would reply, "Never mind about that, boy. Concentrate on this drawing of the Appian Way in your textbook." And after years of ignoring children's good advice, I learned that I actually should find out about my local area. So how do you find out about your local area? If you're a teacher, you have Historical Association magazines, teaching history for secondary, primary history for primary. But you can do your own finding out, and I think it behoves you to try it. A shelf of books, everyone should collect their own books. My family asks me not to put this one in people's way. It says A Lust for Windowsills, which is an interesting book, but daughters worry about these things on the shelves. You also need a sheaf of maps, and your own, if possible. And because I'm in Devon at the moment, on Zoom, I have to point out Devonshire. Robert and I have Devon links. We worked at Ingeston Hall in a drama there, and Ingeston Hall is the home of, or was the home of, Sir William Petre, Principal Secretary to many Tudor monarchs. And his ancestral home was Torbryan, not very far from you. And Robert and I share other passions too. Story is one of them. And local history is one of the ways you can access good stories that mean something to our pupils. Now, because originals is what I'm on about, let me start with a document that I worked on at Chrysall near Saffron Walden. This is a newspaper cutting about a 4-year-old boy killed at work. His neck was broken while he was driving a mare pumping water. This is the news cutting that I found. And one of the ways that I access local history quickly, and we all need shortcuts, is to look in Essex at the Cuttle news cuttings. This man Cuttle was writing a history of the poor law, but he took the trouble to make newspaper cuttings of every village nearly in the county. So you can go to Chrysall and find stuff. And there is the 4-year-old boy's neck broken. That's the winding gear that was used. And when they found him, some of the gear had got wrapped around him and his neck was broken. With the documents of the Record Office, I could trace the boy in parish registers. So when I went to Chrysall's, to their school, it was a shock to talk about the boy, but nice to show them their parish register and Andrew McCrae's entry there. It tells you when he was buried, but not when he died. And as we all know from Shakespeare, precise dates about things are not always possible in the past. I'm always annoyed by people who try to oppose big history against local history, as if they were two separate things. Well, they're not. And you very quickly find out that local is where the big history meets the young pupil, and it's where it meets the young teacher. For me, the big event there, of course, is the Peasants' Revolt, 1381. We're revolting in Essex, we still are. Local history involves evidence if it's best done, and those are three kinds of evidence as defined by the Oxford English Dictionary, and I'll refer to them again. I also think it's about evidence and asking questions. I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I knew. Their names are what and why and when and how and where and who. Of course, Kipling was a journalist, but those 6 questions, if youngsters, they do love learning things. If they can have those, they can have those to remember whenever they tackle an event in history, and they've got a good handle to questions. They also have their own way of questioning things, and they love spotting differences. I was happy enough to persuade the local fire brigade to come and put their new pump and ladder up against a building in Chelmsford to match what had been done with a new pump and ladder in the past. And youngsters they love spotting differences. Of course, the trick in history is always to step back and spot similarities. But that's the next stage, differences. And they're very quick. And they can hazard reasons why. Why are there fewer men on the ladders on the left? And they've heard of health and safety, and they know that they couldn't put that many on a ladder these days. They had to do what they could. History is about asking questions, and greater people than I have worried about, are you asking the right questions as teachers? And Robert knows about the national curriculum, bless him. He was involved in the original MARC, the original version. And since then, teachers have been berated with all sorts of things like attainment targets. And we tried to help teachers in Essex by saying, well, yes, concentrate on the attainment targets, but don't forget your questions. And those are the sort of inquiry-based questions we try to put them in front of in Essex. I go back to my evidence-based beating the drum, the language of documents, the testimony of witnesses, and the grounds provided by objects. Although I've been asked to talk about documents, and I will, I also love and was involved much with the testimony of witnesses, what people can tell you about the past, and also objects. You can't do local history without being involved in objects. And I find the questioning habit all over the place. While reading Messiah, a very frightening detective book by Boris Starling, I loved his quote. His detective has on his desk a quote from The Silence of the Lambs. Problem solving is hunting. It is savage pleasure, and we are born to it. And children are born to asking questions, thank goodness. And one of them is the perennial, is it true, sir? Collecting for history, if you're interested and you can't not be, and you're a young teacher in a fresh area, start collecting stuff about it. God bless her memory, and Mercia Langstone on Canvey Island had never seen, in her 80s, wherever she went in the country, if she would go straight to the shop attached to a country house or wherever, and she would buy stuff because they would come in useful. She knew when she was teaching. She was 40 years out of teaching and still couldn't stop buying this stuff. Now, how do you collect your stuff for local history? Well, all this talk is predicated on the idea that local history is transferable. The village of Chrysall is not quite like Saffron Walden. Saffron Walden is not quite like Chelmsford, but there is enough about local history that is transferable wherever you are, Devon or wherever. And whilst you won't recognize these names, you will have a place name volume in your county, and you will have number 2 there. What is your first printed map of the county? A large scale, sensible printed map. Get yourself a copy of the area around your school. Then go and get the Ordnance Survey map, 25-inch, from the area around your school from the 1890s, and then put them in front of your youngsters, and they can do the work. They can ask the questions, and because it's their area, it will have an impact far greater. Number 4 on there is a commercial directory. If you haven't met these, they are a treat. White's is the one for Essex, which is our best one. But if you can get a directory for the middle of the 19th century and compare it with one from 1933, the youngsters will find the differences. Please, sir, there are wireless repairmen in our village now, whereas there were watchmakers before, and we don't seem to have any watchmakers now. But you will object, youngsters don't easily read documents, and I agree. You have to find a reason for them to look. So one of my banker items is the Book of Fate, and we can try this on you now. There aren't many of you, but Robert can be our victim because I can hear him, he's not muted. Robert, can you choose your favorite number? No bigger than 16, please. Don't look, you mustn't read this document.
7.
7. Gentlemen, look at the column on the left. Now this could be embarrassing for Bev, who is with us, because what does it say? Robert, can you read it now? It's very small, but.
One of the present company.
Okay, so it looks like Bev is going to be your future wife if you get married again. Ladies, look at the column on the right. And if you want to know the consequences of marrying Bev Forrest, they're on the next page, and you keep your 7 number again. What will the consequence be, Robert? Can you read it?
A fit of the vapors, I think.
Exactly, you shall probably faint. Actually, I suggest it will be Bev that will faint and not you.
I should mute myself now, should I, Ian?
Yes, please, otherwise you'll get involved far too much, Robert. I will like picking on you. What I'd like to do is beat the drum, or rather tambourine for history. This is the tambourine that I like to carry around in schools. You may notice on the inside some handwriting, because tambourines used to be made in schools from parchment that they got from anywhere they could get it, and solicitors threw out deeds willy-nilly. So there is a palimpsest, if you like, and history is a kind of palimpsest. Every locality, lots of the things in it are not pure. A stately home is many different ages overlain on the next. Don't tell anyone, but that piece there, fragment there, is what happened to my first tambourine. I struck it too vigorously in classrooms. But the joy of working in a record office was that we had conservators who could make me another one with material they had to hand. Local history is a palimpsest of sorts. It's complicated. It'll take a lifetime to be perfect at, but we don't want to be perfect at it. We want, if we're a youngster, we want to play at local history. And so I'm a great fan of Johann Huizinga, who wrote a book called Homo Ludens, about how in every walk of life we play games. And with a schoolboy's notebook to carry around schools, we have the Brazil cup and ball. Do you remember those things where you have a tethered ball on a string and you try and capture it in the cup? Well, I was silly enough to carry those around schools, give it to very young children who promptly crowned themselves with it, trying to play the game, and I got into awful trouble, but never mind. We were looking at the past. Getting children to care for history. There are many ways. The Historical Association's motto is the generic one, quid agunt homines, what men and women do. Well, it's generic, it's what men, I suppose, originally, but mankind really, so what mankind does, and that's as good a task for anyone. And I'm reminded by other sources that what children love best is what they muse about the future and what they want to be and what they want to learn about. And I think if you can get local history, which has great battles of the human heart in it, then they will go with you and travel alongside with you. Now, what we're about is no idle matter. Historical knowledge is, despite what people say in the press or wherever, it's not a tired afternoon activity that you do have to do after finishing all the important things like maths and English. It is vital. And I follow R.G. Collingwood in this, a great, his book, The Idea of History, which I eventually, later in life, nailed a copy of and read. Hard going in some parts, but very important. It is, history is part of your ability to reason, and local history is where children come across history. Some teachers worry about, well, Ian, where does this fit in with assessment? And I'm a heretic in this. I'm not one who cares much for assessment. If the kids are learning with you and enjoying, then you can go to assessment. I would say one of the best ways you can use, how well can they give you back what you've been learning and talking about? And they may give it back in a different way. This is Spiros, a young lad who ate us green, and the teacher was astonished that he hadn't taken much interest in things for a day or two at school. But you know what you're like when you're a strange voice, as mine is, and you're a visitor, and it should change your routine. Then he listened to what I had to say and show, and I showed a picture of John Peter, and that stuck in his mind, and he drew his own version of it. And the class teacher was astonished that it'd been moved to do this. I wasn't astonished. Youngsters do find things to be interested in. It may not be what we think they should be interested in, but that's how they begin. And we should be asking for the moon, the very best. And I have a couple of heroes in history and life. One of them, after last week's book of the week, is the painter Holbein. I don't know if you heard Book of the Week last week. It was fascinating. But he was a friend of Erasmus, one of my main heroes. And Erasmus had a lovely phrase, which I think should apply to local history. Being a great humanist and Latinist, his phrase was ad fontes, to the pure sources, to the best sources. We owe our children not just secondhand stuff in textbooks, not just stuff that teachers passing on or repeating or regurgitating, but good sources that are complicated, not easy to work with, but because they're complicated, they're full. And they'll have a second page and a third page that you may not have read as a teacher, but as the youngsters leaf through this stuff, they can find, oh, look, there's Brentwood mentioned, sir. My nan lives in Brentwood. I'm really interested in Brentwood. Now you may say this is not a pure reason to pursue history, but I know a lot of historians bigger and better than I who pursue history for not necessarily pure reasons either. But asking for the moon, one of the ways is by considering drama. And Dorothy Heathcote, great lady, used to go around schools in the Durham area working with children. And she tried to work with, I think she wanted to get rid of the mantle of the expert. She wanted to involve youngsters. And she certainly claimed to be no expert about teaching. I don't know how to teach young children. I'd be happy to try out some of my ideas in your school, if you like. And bless you, teachers, you don't mind visitors coming and trying things out in your classroom. I, sadly, after getting my job in the Essex Record Office, had it taken away from me. We had a base at Ingliston Hall, but we had to pay the heating for Lord Peter. And between you and me, the county council folk, we shouldn't be paying for heating just to keep documents safe on the wall. So they abandoned the teaching centre, and they came to me and said, Ian, would you like to go on the road? I said, no, I don't mind going to schools. Can I take the originals with me? And they said, you can. Provided you take a pair of cotton gloves with you, and provided the originals are strong and can withstand the travel, you make your schedule and we'll say whether you can take that or not. So, to my delight, from about 1972 to 2003, I was allowed to take originals into many Essex classrooms, over 100 or so, many more. And it was delightful to watch youngsters working with originals. Shame on me? No, it wasn't a shame. I'm an heretic. I like this. I took Raleigh's original document to create the settlement in Roanoke. This is the foundation document, if you like, one of them, of the United States. I took the original into Essex classrooms, and provided they didn't touch the writing, but just the borders, I allowed them to touch it. And of course, youngsters know the value of things. That document was borrowed in 1985 by the United States, put in a special bag with a lock around the courier's wrist, and taken back to the States and went on its show there. And they valued it while they had it at $1 million. This is 1985, but it's priceless, really. And Essex youngsters love being able to touch a document that was worth $1 million at least. Drama in history wasn't just the province of Dorothy Heathcote. Robert and I remember Dr. John Fiennes of good memory, and he did drama, but he didn't use props or costumes. He would just come to a school and say, I'm going to be Henry VIII for you. He liked it if they knew a little bit about history. And then he would, with his dialogue and the force of his personality, he was away with the youngsters, telling them why he wanted divorce now, and why he wanted this and not that. And the youngsters soon got the hang of being able to question a man who knew his stuff. The trouble with schools is that we're forced to do it repeatedly, work with children, day after day, week after week. This, before lockdown I'm talking about, and hopefully after lockdown. And what we did in schools is often contrive it to make it not very real. Do you recognize what that is in front of you? What are those ladies doing? Well, of course, they're practicing milking cows. And that's what was bought for the children of this village, Roydon, next to Harlow, in 1960. They were provided with a mechanical udder so they could get some experience. I'm amused at this. I can imagine youngsters in Roydon going home and explaining to their families, we were working with a mechanical udder today for youngsters who could probably have access to the real thing. And that's one of my hobby horses. Can we give children access to the real thing? Now, history is of a particular place, and there is a paradox here, if you like. A particular place may not interest anyone beyond that particular place. But I've found, paradoxically, that a lot of this is transferable, not to tell everybody all about Whittam or whatever, but what you can find out in your village is matched by things that are found out in other villages. So as a young teacher, it may be hard work in your first school, but as you get the template for finding out about the past, it becomes easier. Well, I worked at Cressing Temple for a time, and there's me dressing up, being Roger Ascham, or Ascham, I don't know how it's pronounced, who wrote The Schoolmaster, a great Tudor book on teaching. And I loved Roger Ascham. Never met the man, of course. I'm not that old. But there I am, getting youngsters to try a pair of stilts we crafted. I also bought 2 or 3 longbows, children's size, and got using county council money, we got a craftsman of longbows to make them. We put blunts on the end, of course, rubber ends, and then we fired at a target. And they loved doing these kinds of things. Because of course, if you went to school in the Tudor period, a part of every day was given over to exercises. Gosh, how the Tudor period had education sorted. We don't now. We are preoccupied, obsessed with studies. But in the Tudor period, education was studies, manners, and exercises. They cared about children's virtue, how they behaved. And I think we should take a leaf out of private schools in this respect and get people to think about their behavior in schools and out, and not be ashamed too much about talking about these matters. and discussing them. It doesn't always go well doing drama. I also had them hit a ball with a stick, and I made them stand behind that seat there. And of course, one child wandered round the side and he got hit with a stick. And blood was shed and accident forms had to be filled in. Is it worth it, Ian? Teachers would say. Yes, it was worth it. We survived, and so did the boy. What should you be when you're learning about local history? Well, maybe you shouldn't be like a pupil. Being like a pupil is in statu pupillariae. Collingwood, again, a hero of mine, said that we shouldn't see history as a settled thing that's a matter of the textbooks. And if you go out and look at local history, it certainly isn't settled there. It's being changed and amended, and the history books are being rewritten. What do I notice in The Guardian today? Now, I know you're Devon and you won't have anything to do with Dorset, the county next to you, but have you seen, is it Cernabus? I may not be pronouncing this correctly, but they've dated the giant, the figure that looks like Hercules with his club, and I'll leave it there, I won't be rude. Well, that figure, they have dated from when the sand was first exposed to daylight. They've dated it from shells in the site, and guess what? It's Saxon, dated between AD 700 and 1000 roughly. Well, that confounds. We'd love for it to have been prehistoric, but what's wrong with Anglo-Saxon? Great sense of humor they had. Anyway, coming to things that touch youngsters, documents that do. This is quite small, and maybe you can't read this very easily. So this is advice given in the 1930s to Essex schools from the medical officer of health, telling children in Essex when they should be in bed. Now, this is a live issue in every family for most youngsters, whether they're 15 or 6. Families have the devil of a job trying to arrange bedtimes, and they tend to send children of different ages to bed together at the same time. Always a terribly unjust thing to do. So if you're aged 5 to 7, you have to have 11 to 12 hours of sleep, and you must be in bed in summertime at 7 o'clock. If you put your youngsters to bed at 7 o'clock as a parent, you'll soon realize that this is a nonsense. They're going to be waking with the sun, coming into your room and saying, "Hey, Mum, what can we do now? Go back to bed. It's 4 o'clock." But this is medical officers are healthy. But I like the reasons given. Reason 2, it's very important that children get rest in bed, because sufficient rest in bed means less wear and tear to clothes and boots, and a quiet hour or 2 for the mother after the children have gone to bed. Very important reason. Buildings and the locality. Goodness me, we can't avoid our buildings and we love them. Every locality has its special buildings. But come back to my specialism and documents. Documents about buildings and inventories are very important. Here is a list of the property of John Gerard, and he died in about 1715. And this is a poor man's goods. These are his listed goods. And yes, try and get the youngsters to grapple with it. They'll say, "I can't read this." They want to give up, and we mustn't let them sometimes. Keep them at it a bit. Yes, you've got to think about making it easier. So this is the same document transcribed. I don't know if that's easier for you to read. Imprimis, in the first place, Latin, they always begin that way. 1 flock bed and bedstead. And what you realize as you read through this is you're getting more than just a list of possessions. You're getting the Essex accent. It says lower down, 1 jug, 1 saucepan. This is how in Essex we talk, if we're not Londoners and we're not estuarine English, and we have something of the locality about us. Can they read these things? Most youngsters say, "No, I can't." So maybe you have to force them to transcribe. So what can you read of this? Slowing down to read. And my favorite reference tool is the Oxford English Dictionary. There isn't a word in a document that you won't find its meaning. And if you get them slowly and painstakingly to note down the words flock, bedstead, bolstead, warming pan, there's the Essex accent again, lanthorn, ton, chest, hutch, and they'll begin to have questions of their own. Hutch, does that mean they had rabbits? No, hutch is an older word than containers for rabbits. A broodmag, a saspen, there's a long S in old documents, which they love to be confounded by. Essex is written E-F-F-E-X, of course. And you get the youngsters to think about which human activities was this poor person able to perform, looking at this list only. Well, flock, bedstead, bolstead, warming pan, he could sleep. Ton, chest, hutch, cupboard, he had things. Even though he's poor, he had stuff. And some of his stuff is listed. They'll know what a suspen is. Pewter spoons, they might know. A trommel, they won't. I believe these are the iron rings that you need to suspend a pan over the fire when you're cooking. You need a bill, kind of hook, and to go and get wood to make your fire go. You need a pail to get water or milk. And then it moves into his clothes. A waistcoat, breeches, a sad collared greatcoat. Now this is why I like history in its original form. It's not final. The youngsters can make their version of this. Is sad collared a greatcoat with a poor collar? It's frayed. Or is it sad colored? It's lost its color through use. No one knows. Their guess is good as any of the experts. And this is my list of those OED terms transcribed. At the bottom is wig. He had a wig. Yes, poor people in 1715 could have a wig. The poor is an imprecise term. It could just mean that he had died in sad times, lost his employment. This can happen to anyone. And the stuff he formerly had, he still has. And when he dies, they make a list of it all. Street furniture, wherever you live. I loved taking youngsters out and with brass rubbing kit, rubbing some of the stuff you find in pavements. Now you get passers-by being amused by this, especially if you're rubbing something like a water hydrant or whatever. But to the young, age is a relative term anyway. You won't be able to read this, but that should say Beaufort Street. Place names are a very fertile part of local history. Each county has its own place name, society, volume, and if you're lucky, you can trace your history of your village and find different explanations. Marant's History of Essex will have one reason why the village has this name, and White's Directory a bit later will have another reason for the place name. Great, historians disagree. Surprise, surprise. What do the children think? And not to make them arbiters in the final case, but let's have some of their reasons and thinking why they do these things. Objects, they're important to history. You can probably guess what these are. Coins are very fertile for history. That one in the front I draw your attention to, it's got a man's name stamped on it. These are in my own possession, come from my blacksmith grandfather, who played pitch and toss in the village. They put a little pan in the ground with sand in it. They stood back, balanced the coin on their hands, and tossed it into the pot and bet on the outcome, of course. These are cartwheel pennies of George III. And gosh, when youngsters can find some this old, our modern currency is ridiculous. But I mustn't demean the present in favor of the past. Our skill and expertise is not in coins anymore. It is in credit cards and the holograms and the artistic work on those. So we must credit those as well. Do like objects, staying with the Historical Association used to produce pamphlets. And if you're old as I am, and Robert, you probably collected some of these from charity shops, as I did. And they had one on numismatics. And children love precision. Why not find out yourself as a teacher? The front of a coin is called the obverse, Latin again, and the back is the reverse. And the bit at the bottom where the line is, and perhaps the year number, is called the exergue, E-X-E-R-G-U-E. And all these, and there is a difference between the legend on a coin, if it's written one way, and an inscription, which is written the other. Why not settle this once and for all when they're 5 or they're 12, and look at these things in detail together? Can I draw your attention to the 50p piece? Well, I still use them because I play for 50p golf every Tuesday, and I'm swapping it backwards and forwards. But if I remember correctly, as well as Britannia on the coin, you have around the edge of the coin, FD, Fidei Defensor. This is the medal that Henry VIII got for being a good Catholic. Now there's complicated history for you. Henry VIII, a good Catholic. Sir, my textbook tells me he was a bad Catholic. Not necessarily. He didn't like Luther's criticisms, and he wrote in defense of the papacy. This is before he had the divorce problem, which changed his mind about papacy. But FD on coins is interesting. One of the many stories that you can find and tell. Personal testimony. Oh gosh, do you know you're better placed in a school with children aged 13, 14, and those 6 and 7 to find good personal testimony, because the older residents, the older family members will still talk to their young about their past and in detail. And some of my best history was found going around schools, following another teacher's footsteps. I'm thinking of Will Williams, who taught at Chowdhury School in Leindon. But he went to the War Memorial in the church, got the children to write down the names of the victims of the Great War. And then, as luck would have it, he had an older resident who knew somebody who could talk about the First World War. This man lived in Southend, a great place where I happen to live at present. He got this old man from Southend who remembered the beginning of the mutiny at Etaples in 1917. Now this, as far as I know, can only just recently be checked because the documents were under embargo for 100 years. In this country, we don't like talking about mutinies, so they don't want you to study them. But I don't know much work has been done on the 1917 mutiny, but this man witnessed it, and he said that at this training camp, this is a retraining camp, if you'd been down the line or whatever, back home, invalided, and you were coming back, you were retrained again. And it was full of bull, this training camp, an officer who was far too precious. And the soldiers weren't allowed to go into the town at night. So one night there was a bridge, and guarding the bridge were MPs, military policemen. And one of them was a famous boxer. He was recognized. And when some soldiers, they would be Scottish, I'm being racist here, but then I have Scots blood as well. They wanted to get to the drink and they were not going to be prevented. So they charged the MP's post, and this hothead of an MP fired a round and hit one of the soldiers in the leg. Now this could be a total cock and bull story unless you have real documents to discredit it. But it's a good story, it's locally found. So what happened then? The Scots soldiers got into Etaples and drank as much as they liked, and the mutiny developed. Who knows what local history, personal testimonies will turn up with you and your youngsters. Some great sources. I mentioned John Fiennes, another hero of mine. He is very good on using Domesday Book. Now, we're a bit lucky in Essex. Our Domesday Book is bigger than yours. This is the old male preoccupation. We have more detail about our villages in it. But even so, villages elsewhere in Domesday will have listed how many people. And for every man, every villager or serf, you're to think of a family, 5 or 6. And you can get to some children's estimation of the size of the village in 1085 or thereabout. One of the great sources in our county is the tithe map. Unfortunately, not enough of us use this. I know a chap called Robert Guyver who drew one. I think is it Wembury. He drew it in great detail and in colour. I had one and I need to get another one because I think I've misplaced it. Don't tell Robert that. But what he did was trace out that, and there is no finer way of getting to know your locality. In Essex, we train by starting with the Ordnance Survey 6-inch map, late 19th century, and laboriously tracing out all the field patterns, and then going to the tithe map and writing in the field numbers, and then going to the award, which most of you may not have come across, written on animal skin again, in rolls. But this is a great thing from the 1830s. They were mapping the whole country and who owned the land and what the land was being used for. But it names the fields. Some great speculation here. You'll have a pot of gold field. And that sounds, oh, they must have been making a lot of money out of that field. But never forget that human beings can be cantankerous and ironic. Pot of gold field, when you go to look at it, could actually be a scrubby little piece that the farmer couldn't make any living out of at all. But if you really want to get to know your locality, do these extra laborious steps. They repay you enormously. DIY is the order of the day with youngsters. If you're doing Romans, make some Vindolanda letters of your own. Here is one my granddaughter made, and she'll kill me for this, but I can read you the bits inside that say not to be opened. It's up there on the left, on the right, sorry, the left on the right. I love Aaron B and Elliot L. I bet she still doesn't. And I like this. God created love and kisses. She's not religious now, but I bet she's still interested in love and kisses. Yeah, Vindolanda, those are based on the Vindolanda writing tablets. If you visit Vindolanda, they've discovered we never thought we'd ever find anything but epigraphy, writing on stones, but we've found documents now, and they're interesting. I love the one about the chap writing home for more underpants, always a problem on the Roman wall. Now, I'm getting the feeling I'm boring even myself, so I'll draw near the end. How do you do all this? How do you begin and how do you continue? Last Saturday, we had Dr. Vivian Newman. She's at Essex University, giving a great talk on children in the Great War, 1914 to 18. And I love the HA because it is wedded to the idea that if you've done all right out of history, you need to put something back and give a little talk for the cost of transport or a luncheon or whatever. But she had a great phrase. And when she was questioned about how did you find out about that or this, she said, I just pick up a thread and I follow it. And that's really it. It doesn't matter where you begin. That's where you do. What you do, where you do. What else can you do as a teacher? Go to your local branch of the Historical Association. But I give you a warning, it could change your life. I am sitting here in Southend because I went to my Essex branch as a Cumbrian, and I realized I was never going to be able to find out enough about the local history, I needed to take some shortcuts. So I went to my local branch of the HA, didn't say much, surprise, surprise then, sat at the back and listened and listened. And eventually they came good for me, the Essex branch. When I went, I took sixth formers along to the archive. All teachers of sixth formers should make a visit to the archive near them, get permission, of course, prepare the ground, take your sixth formers in there. Well, I did this and befriended Nancy Briggs, a great local archivist. And later on in my life, when I've been teaching 5 or 6 years, I conceived the idea of maybe looking for something else to do. I was never going to make a deputy head or the hierarchy of a secondary school. I wasn't gruff enough, and I couldn't spend all day telling children why they shouldn't jump into privet hedges on the way to school. And these are important, I know. But I found a job advertised working in a local record office. They wanted a trained teacher, and I applied, and some very good teachers, very experienced local historians applied. But luckily, the people, the head of the archive and the county inspector, wasn't particularly interested in those very much worthier candidates. He knew a little about me because accidentally I taught his boy at school, and he and his boy, we sort of got on okay. I also taught the son of the head of Essex Education, Mr. Morris, and so he knew a little. So I think I got the job by default, and it changed my life. Again, working from the record office, I decided I needed a sabbatical year. This is an heretical word, a year off to learn. Well, they gave me one in the early, middle of the 20th century, and come on, get your figures right. And I got a year off to study. So I had the joy of being able to go to London museums, Essex Record Office. I only had 1 hour a week of lectures to attend, so I could take time. And you do need time to study and wander. Of course, history isn't dead. And I hope you're writing your COVID diaries, because they'll be wanting to know how COVID-19 was, and you are the pure source for this. But this is Beaufort Street, where I happen to live. That was the place name you saw before. And we're going to have a street party, which I shall go to with my camera. They ended the Second World War with a street party. In some ways, COVID-19 is more of a demanding conflict, as influenza was at the end of the First World War. And it will be worth maybe recording the aftermath of that one. Yes, how these things affect us. History doesn't stop, and we're still interested. A few more pious thoughts before I leave you. Despite what some people say, they want us to be technicians. Stop faffing about, just teach what you're told to teach. What's the worry? It's not a technical process, it's an art. And I was lucky enough to come across Gilbert Hyatt's The Art of Teaching, an old book, but a lovely book, explained the artistic side of teaching. George Steiner put it very well, quoting Pushkin: a teacher is like a good postman, knowing when to deliver. You need to know what to deliver and when to deliver it. You need to know your locality as best you can, and you need to know your youngsters. Study to know your subject, and study to know your children. And I come back to Erasmus again, another of my heroes. Homines dum docent discunt. Men and women learn while they teach. No one learns faster than somebody who's got to teach it in the next 20 minutes. And that's what I have found. I've been lucky enough, forced to learn and find out about many an Essex village. A difficult bit I've passed over. Interpretations of history. You won't find many historians talking about this, unless you get Christine to come and talk to you, as we did in Essex. Very good. But your children should be exposed to popular history. That's theme parks, advertising. When it crops up and touches the parts of history you're doing, pinch it. plagiarizing. Fictional, they need to discuss and see all of those things. Educational, textbooks. How we teach history. One of my great possessions is a history exercise book of the 19th century. What is it about? Well, I go to a blank page and you have 9 columns to fill, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them are about monarchy. When they were born, when they died, to whom they were married, what their character was like, and other contemporary monarchs elsewhere. This is the best history in the 19th century. They obviously got it wrong in a way. They only had one little section on memorable events. And I suspect we're getting it wrong in the present as well, in our approved textbooks and what have you. But I must leave you with a joke. Leave them with a laugh has been good advice. Tommy Cooper or someone like that. You can't read the joke, but you'll know that I'm a record office man and I've been well trained there. I've got the provenance. This joke is on a mini milk from Walls, and it cost me 50p this to liberate it from my son. He strikes a hard bargain. This is dated 1985. He's just gone 40. If I tell him I was using it again, he'll probably ask for a second levy on this. What is the joke? Brace yourselves. It's not a belly laugh, but involves archives. Question: where did Noah keep his bees? Answer: in the archives. Okay, Robert?
Okay, thank you, Ian. Thank you so much. It's so nice to hear your voice again and to experience your sense of humor, I must say, which came over very strongly. And I'm so glad that we're recording this, because I hope many, many more people can watch it. And the teachers, especially, who would benefit from your advice very strongly, I think. And the vast range of things you've mentioned, I find incredible. You've gone from Romans through Anglo-Saxons, rather naughty Anglo-Saxons, through the Normans and Tudors, etc.
Robert, forgive me. The Exeter Riddle book.
Oh yes, yes.
A favorite Saxon source.
Yes, I know all about it.
Sorry.
Yeah, yes, indeed, yeah. But no, I think local history should be used much more by teachers, both secondary and primary. And it's my great hope that local communities can work with schools and teachers to help them, because there's a great deal of interest in local history out there, and a lot of people are doing private research which they need to share, and the Historical Association, I think, is a very good medium for this to happen. Yes, yeah, what's that say?
Dig where you stand.
Oh
Which
yeah,
is not very good advice, I'd have thought.
No.
But this is community history for Milton Keynes.
Yes, exactly. I love that story about the memory about the Etaples mutiny. I had a great uncle who went through Etaples when he was wounded. He had, I think it was on the way back to England. After he was wounded twice actually, but Etaples comes into his story. And yes, they're fantastic that you could actually make that link with somebody who was still living. I must shut up now and ask if anyone else has a question or a comment to make. Here we are. Bev is saying, many thanks, strongly recommend contacting your local branch. Did this recently when I was working with teachers in Ealing, and they provided me with so much fabulous information that I could apply to the local history NC units. Yeah, yes. The
absolutely right.
Yep, absolutely. I agree with that.
Yeah, can I add to that, because I think that's one of the things with teachers, that we have the ideas of what we want to do with local history, but we don't necessarily have the time, and we certainly don't know that much about our locality always, because often the teachers don't live in the area. And that's where the branch really strongly comes in.
Here,
they've
here,
finally
here,
got-
here.
yeah, you've got people that have got a real passion for local history, which I found with Peter Hansel in Ealing, a passion, and they've got the knowledge. And
He's
so
got the second-hand books as well.
yes, yeah, it's written some really fabulous material. But it means then you can bring the two forces together, and I think that's something that we're going to try to do more with the primary committee and looking at branches as well and work on that. I think it's a
Right, yeah.
really
I
Can I
agree.
reply to
Yeah.
Robert? Robert, can I reply to that for a
Yes, of
second?
course, yes.
Bev,
Yeah.
after Saturday's meeting, we had a teacher from Chadwell Heath send us an email saying just that she was new to the area and wanted help. And I was about to reply with all the stuff that I have here, but another of our committee members stepped in, Shirley Durgan, and she could trump me easily. She grew up in Chadwell Heath. She was there till she was 4 years of age. She became an expert in the Victoria County history, one of the great sources of local history, and she knew chapter and verse where the teacher could get any amount of local information. Yes, we do need as teachers. I'm from Cumbria. How was I going to find out about Essex? The branch was it. But yeah, we shouldn't be daunted. We're not after a complete item. Teachers should be learners as well as pupils too. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I say something? I've got this idea of a scheme for the estuary for getting local history societies to work with primary schools, well, and secondary schools if they're interested, to sort of work on a kind of project. And I'm just encouraging them to have a conversation together, you know, the local history societies meeting with the schools, just to find out what the schools want and what the local history societies can offer. It has to be a kind of dialogue. But the local societies also need to know what's in the curriculum and what the schools can do or and so on. But it's a kind of but what Ian has done just now is to provide some very, very fine examples of what can be done, and the imagination, the humor, and the links, the activities, everything. It's I'm very, very grateful to Ian for actually giving us some very fine examples.
I stand on the shoulders of giants, Robert.
No, I learned a lot from you, Ian, when I was working in Essex. I must say, it was great fun.
I learned a lot with you. We had some good lunch times together.
Yes, we did indeed, yes. Because Essex has a tremendous reputation for working with schools. I think it goes back to Butler, doesn't it? Wasn't Rab Butler, he was the Secretary of State for Education.
And also an MP in the Saffron Walden area.
Yes.
But
yes.
it goes back to Dr. F.G. Emerson, who
Yes.
actually was a good friend of the Historical Association too. He was our first archivist, and what a tremendous self-publicist he was. But he used to argue, I suppose, like monarchs do. He was publicizing his record office as well as the work of a county archivist. But he did very well for Essex. And if we gained a reputation for being preeminent, which we had in the 50s and 60s, it was a lot down to Dr. F.G. Emerson.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he wrote a book about the gentleman you mentioned, William Peter, didn't he?
He did, and
yeah.
I tackled him about it in his book, which he said Sir William Peter went to school in Exeter because he refounded Exeter College, Oxford, but there's no evidence for that. And I was writing a dissertation of my own on Sir William Peter, and I said to him, "Can I ask you about this? I haven't found," and he tut-tutted and wanted to move on and talk about other things.
Well, I know who did found Exeter College. It was Bishop Stapleton.
But I know who refounded it.
Yeah.
Sir William Peter.
Oh, right. Okay.
And his daughter
yeah.
founded Wadham College.
Oh, splendid. Yeah.
It was her drive and force and her Peter education, I suspect.
Yes,
that did
well, I
that.
know a Peter Wadham who lives in Exeter, who is a descendant, I think, of one of those Wadhams. But no, Bishop Stapleton had his head chopped off in the in a dispute between Edward II and his wife Isabella. They had to fish him out of the River Thames, unfortunately. But
That was careless.
well, he was the king. He was the treasurer. He was the you know, he was looking after the money, and the people on the ground didn't much like him, unfortunately. Although there's a very, very fine image of him in Exeter Cathedral, a sort of a sculpted image. It's a sort of 3D thing on his tomb, and his brother was attacked as well, Richard, Sir Richard Stapleton. He and his the pages that were with him, they were also killed. It's very nasty. But anyway, I don't want to finish on that note. But yeah, it's I agree with Bev. And anyway, if one good thing comes out of this, and I know that Bev will push it forward, I think a stronger link between branches, schools, and people who are interested in local history in the community. I think if that comes out of this. And also I think that teachers who watch this will gain a lot from it, and lots of ideas. And if they have half of your enthusiasm, Ian, I think that there'll be a great success. But sorry, I must shut up, and let's, if anyone else wants to say something, or if Bev wants to come back on this, or does anyone else wish to say anything?
No, just to say that I am really pushing that, working together with branches. I think that is a great way forward, and using that model as well that I worked on with Peter in Ealing. I think that's it works so well.
Great, that's super. Yes, the Ealing branch have been very helpful to the Exeter branch in helping us, giving us advice about Zoom and about setting up a website. So the Ealing branch is in my good books anyway. Yeah. I think, isn't Peter going to, well, maybe
yeah.
It's not public knowledge, but no.
Peter's the new chair, yes.
Oh, right, yes. Yeah, okay, great. What's happened to you, Ian? I've lost you.
I'm here.
Okay, right. Yeah. Right. Well, shall we wind this up? I could go on talking to Ian for ages, I think, but you probably need to go and have something to drink. but again, thank you very, very much.
I have a cold beer in the fridge.
Well,
I
you
think
deserve
you've
it.
earned that, definitely.
Yes, you certainly have.
Yeah, and look forward to seeing you in Bristol in 2022.
Yeah, I wanted to go to Bristol, but
Yeah.
I went to the first Zoom meeting, but I'll happily wait for the real thing again.
Well, we'll see you there next year.
Okay, Bev, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Lovely to see you
Right.
again, and thank you so much.
Okay, Ian. Well, thank you very much, Ian. Shall we call it a day then? Right. Where are you? Yeah.